Well, welcome to the Nickel City Mafia DFS Jags PGA Golf Show, the 2022 Valero Texas Open. I'm Tony Altieri, and normally I would say this is Dr. Riku Mukherjee, but Rick is on vacation, so I'm flying solo tonight. That means directing, producing, building content, narrating, the whole deal. So I apologize in advance to anybody watching at home, but Rick is enjoying the luxuries of Southern California, Disneyland, Palm Springs, and of course, beautiful Orange County. So you've got me tonight putting a nightcap on the week on Tuesday, getting ready for the Valero Texas Open. Just to recap what happened last week, obviously we all witnessed Scottie Scheffler kind of rise to the occasion at a place where we knew he was comfortable, at a course where he had had multiple attempts and had played many times before. Scottie is a Texas guy. He is a University of Texas Longhorn, and he played like a guy from Austin. He played wonderfully and ended up winning the match play. Again, he finished second here last year, so no big surprise in watching Scottie do that. He vaults all the way to the number one player in the world, and he becomes just the sixth man to do that before the age of 25. He joins some pretty rarefied air in that group of guys. It's basically him, Tiger, Spieth, Rory, JT, and Rahm. And really what it comes down to is where's the ceiling for Scottie Scheffler. We don't really know at this point in time, but if you would have told me that Scottie Scheffler would be the number one player in the world before Hovland, Morikawa, or you name any of the young guns that are out there, I would have told you were crazy. But the kid's won 3 times in the matter of 42 days, and he is inarguably the hottest player on the planet. So congrats to Scottie Scheffler. Last week was an absolute loser for me, but it didn't have a ton of exposure. It's like we talked about, Rick and I, last week. It is a very odd week in match play. The course sets up well for certain skill sets, and obviously the dynamic of not playing stroke play, where you're competing against another guy, that adds an element that basically throws a monkey wrench in what we would consider normal DFS and normal betting. And guys like Kisner and Scheffler and Hatton, these guys just tend to show up in these formats. For the week, 6 of 6 finished, I think less than a quarter of 1%. I cashed a lineup with 2 of 6 with a guy playing in the finals and in the third place round. And we talked about just how wonky the week could be. Obviously, we get back into more normal circumstances this week, but oh, by the way, it is the week before a major. For many people, this is the true start of the PGA golf season with the Masters in April, and we get into inarguably the most coveted title for PGA golfers. The Masters every year played at Augusta National. It is a unique dynamic that we don't have for any of the others, and I absolutely love it. There's so much history and prestige and everything wrapped into Augusta National and the Masters, and obviously we have a number of guys that play there. By the way, DFS pricing on DraftKings is out if you have not seen it, and of course, like we love to talk about, it is highly compressed. Surprisingly enough, Scottie Scheffler, number one player in the world, is topping your pricing at $11,000, which is crazy for Scheffler basically to come out here and be the number one golfer in the world going into our first major. And coming in at $11,000 is pretty insane. He's followed by Rahm, DJ, JT, Morikawa, Hovland, and of course, Rory McIlroy. What'll be interesting to see is where ownership starts to build. Obviously, because pricing is out nearly 2 weeks in advance of the tournament, or I should say a week earlier than we typically see DFS pricing available on DraftKings, we'll be able to get a much better read on ownership. So when Rick and I start to look at next week and building into the Masters, whether we do the show on Monday, Tuesday, or whenever it is, we will obviously have a much better take on where ownership is starting to line up for the Masters as folks gear up for that tournament. Surprisingly enough, when we look at the pricing, at least through the guys that are in the upper portion of the $7,000 range, it's amazing to me that we have a guy like Will Z at 9,200, and we have multiple tour winners like Sam Burns, Daniel Berger, Bryson DeChambeau, Sung Jae Im, Joaquin Niemann, and Tony Finau, all at lower price points than Will Z. it's pretty amazing when you think about it. Obviously, a lot of respect for Will Z and what he did through most of the major season last year. But, to see his pricing basically higher than a bunch of guys that I just listed off who had won here in the last year is pretty amazing. But Will Z, it'll be interesting to see where his ownership shakes out as we get into the Masters next week. But of course, before we do that, we do have the Valero Texas Open this week, I should say, at TPC San Antonio. We are playing the Oaks course. There are two courses here, and you're going to hear a lot about Davis Riley winning at TPC San Antonio, but you got to remember, I believe that was at the National course, which is the other course on the TPC San Antonio grounds. But we are here on the Oaks. Your winner last year was Jordan Spieth. It's 7,200 yards, or 72 par 72, 7,500 yards, and it's a mix of Bermuda overseeded with POA, and what we like to look for here and what is done well is obviously ball striking. The course here, finding the fairway and having an opportunity to get up and down to hit greens in regulation is at a premium, so opportunities gained. Driving distance, if you look what Bryson did basically at Bethpage back at the U.S. Open, and you look what guys have done here in the past, the farther that you can hit the ball down the fairway, right, the closer proximity that you can put yourself into, because there isn't a lot of water hazards or trouble on this course. Guys can take advantage of distance, but we've seen a number of guys win here before from a bunch of different skill sets. But for me, driving distance, par 5 scoring, the par 5s are reachable, so it's going to bring that into play for a lot of guys. But I think if you can take advantage of the par 5s, you're going to have a much better advantage than a bunch of guys who are struggling to score on par 5. So par 5 scoring will be important for me. And then, of course, proximity, the key distance, that wedge different distance from 125 to 175 is going to be extremely important. And it will be crucial for guys who are playing this course and looking to score and trying to take advantage to not fall behind. The course has played fairly typical in terms of scoring over the years. We haven't seen super low scores, and we have had a couple of outlier years because of wind where scoring and cuts have been well over par. But barring any crazy wind or weather dynamics that could blow in this week, the course should play at your normal -9 to -12 that we see at most of the TPC tracks throughout the year. As we jump into pricing and we look at the most upper tier of DraftKings, we've got 5 names above $10,000: Rory McIlroy, Hideki Matsuyama, Jordan Spieth, Abraham Answer, and Bryson DeChambeau. Obviously, Answer's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb there. You could make an argument about Bryson and the fact that he has not been playing very well coming back from injury. But, Answer's the guy for me that probably sticks out. But the reason he's priced there is he has been playing better. This is a home course track for him. He's going to have a lot of steam behind him like we saw he did in Austin last week. Obviously, Spieth has won here before. He's from the University of Texas. He is a Texas guy. And then Rory at the top of the board is very interesting because the course sets up very, very well for him. If you look at the guys who've played well here and who have actually won this event, there are some corollary leaderboards to Quail Hollow, which is obviously a place where Rory has played very, very well. In terms of guys over 10K and where ownership is starting to pool, really Rory, Jordan, and Answer, the 3 guys that I mentioned there, are gaining the most steam in terms of ownership according to Fantasy National. Oddly enough, if you really look at it, Rory's the only guy that's scary. He's coming in at roughly 18% ownership, which is obviously very, very high. The guy that nobody is touching is Bryson DeChambeau, and to me, he presents a ton of value. Obviously, if you're going to play a guy like Bryson this week, you have to be cognizant of, basically how poorly he's played and the fact that he is coming off injury. But I saw enough last week in Austin to say, okay, the putting's there, the irons looked good, the around the green game was okay. It's never been a strength for him. But the one outlier where he underperformed was obviously with his driver, and that is his number one weapon. So if that starts to move closer, performs more towards his mean, where he can take advantage of the par 4s and the par 5s with the driver, I like the way Bryson sets up here, and I think he's got a great opportunity. And if I can get him in a much weaker field than we're going to see obviously next week at the Masters, but get him at sub 10% ownership and a bit of a discount at the lower end of the $10,000 tier, you got to love that. I mean, again, you're going to have to pick your poison, and if Bryson just is, there's too many unknowns for you to stomach that. I totally get it, but I can't see going to somebody like Answer, who I believe has got bloated pricing by about $2,000. And then the other guy that I think no one's talking about, but his ownership will still come in somewhat okay, is Hideki. Hideki actually sets up perfectly for this course. But for me, above 10K, I'm going to take Bryson. I'm going to take a chance and a flyer there. He'll also be on my betting card as we get into that a little bit later. But he's probably the only guy that I'll be using above $10,000 this week. As we drop down into the next tier, we also have another previous winner. We mentioned Spieth, but of course, Corey Connors. He ranks number 1 in my model, and that's one thing that I haven't done a good job about talking about is the rankings that you're seeing there, the overall rank, the stat rank, the tournament history rank, and of course, current form. Those are all generated through Fantasy National. It's a custom model that I build each and every week and that I make available to folks on Twitter. So if you have any questions or you want to understand how my model works or want to get a copy of it, reach out to me on Twitter. I post it there. I'd be happy to share that with you. But Connors comes in number 1 in my model. He's the top of the 9K range, followed by Si Woo, Mav McNeely, Chris Kirk, Gary Woodland, Keegan Bradley, Tony Finau, and Jason Day. Obviously, there's 2 guys sandwiched in the middle of this pricing bracket in Kirk and Woodland who are coming in super chalky. Connors is the other guy that's probably going to garner a lot of ownership. And currently, if we're looking at the $9,000 range, it's really Woodland and Kirk that are coming in at close to 20%. Connors is there as well, too. The guy that nobody wants to touch for obvious reasons, very similar to Bryson, is Jason Day. Day's missed a couple tournaments. Obviously, the passing of his mom and what's going on in his personal life has not been playing well since the Farmers. But he's in there at $9,000, and he's coming in at basically 3% ownership. So realistically, if you're going to take a chance above $9,000, for me, I'd rather take the chance on Bryson, who I think has a real chance to win this event, than a guy like Jason Day. Finau's another one because the long-term form for Finau and how he plays, what his strengths are, and how the course sets up, Finau really lays out very well to perform here, and you're going to get his ownership, which is typically anywhere between 12 and 18%. You're going to get him at a massive discount this week. You might even get him at sub 10% ownership. So a guy like Finau, I think I'd be willing to take a chance on. Obviously, if I'm taking chances on Bryson in lineups, then I'm going to have to make some moves other places. But, the $9,000 range for me is probably an area where I will have some scatter shots placed very, very strategically in my DFS lineups, but a place where I'm probably going to have quite a few bets. I do love Kirk and Woodland and Finau from a betting perspective. The numbers on Kirk's have dropped pretty hard since they opened. Whether you're watching Mayao or Rick or any of the talking heads out there, Kirk opened at like anywhere from 70 to 80, and he's all the way down in some spots below 30 to 1. He's become very popular. And of course, Woodland, who's on brand for me, I can't stay away from him. No one's going to own Keegan. No one's going to own Day. People are staying away from Mav McNeely. And then, Siwoo, because of the Mayao bump, he is going to garner some ownership in this range. And it just depends how people do ownership stacks. My guess is the most popular build is probably going to be Rory Connors, or perhaps Spieth Connors to start lineups, and then folks will venture down obviously into the 7 and 6Ks. As we drop down into the next tier, into the 8,000s, one of my favorite bets at Adam Hadwin leads off, followed by Streelman, Vegas, List, Davis Riley, fresh off of a playoff loss to our boy Sam Burns after we hit the winner at the Valspar, Russell Knox, Charlie Hoffman, who is the all-time winningest player in terms of the amount of money that he's won at this tournament. It's the Valero Texas Open has jokingly been called the Charlie Hoffman Open for a number of years. Fan favorite Mito Pereira, my favorite guy in the tournament, Patton Kazire, and Ryan Palmer, a guy who has very, very good course history, obviously a Texas guy. And for me, it's going to be difficult here because I think this range, depending on how people want to do builds, has an opportunity to offer some really chalky guys. Hadwin's coming in at close to 15%, List at 15%, Kazire at nearly 20% ownership. And that's probably why I'll end up steering away from Kazire from a DFS perspective, but I love him as a bet. Positional betting for him I think would be very popular this week. And, Kazire has done a good job. I tweeted out earlier this week If you look at what he did last year in Texas, he had 3 top 10 finishes. 2 of those were top 5s. Everything that he's doing, all of the strokes gain metrics, he's gaining in basically every single category. The only one is not is off the tee, and he's basically over the last 20 events playing at 0 stroke gain versus the field. So the guy literally is gaining in every single metric. And so Kazire's super popular this week. I will have an outright bet on him. He'll also be on my card for positional betting, but I think he sets up very, very well here. And I think he's got a great opportunity, which is obviously why he's at 17-18% ownership going into the week. But Kazire is one of those guys that I think a lot of people are going to end up gravitating to. Mito, oddly enough, I like Mito a lot, but some of the shine is off the pumpkin for me. He just hasn't really lived up to, I think, the hype that we all had. The ball striking continues to be very, very strong. There were a couple weeks in there where he was carried by his chipping and putting, but he's starting to return back to the ball striker that we saw. I guess the big unknown for me in this range is really Charlie Hoffman. It's a guy who historically, like we talked about, just crushes it at this course. And, he's obviously not been playing very well. And, looking at Fantasy National where ownership's coming in, you're going to end up getting him sub, 7-8%, which is very good for a guy who has as good of course history as he has. And I think it's likely that he could end up, by the time we get into lock, a little bit higher. The other guy from an ownership perspective that is gaining some steam, that I think will end up much higher than the projections are have him at right now is Davis Riley. Riley is so fresh in people's minds. Obviously, he didn't play in the match play, but he had a runner-up loss to Sam Burns, where Burns hit just an unbelievable putt from like 25 feet off the green to win that event. And Riley played phenomenal. The ball striking for him has been there all year. And we're starting to see the flashes of what he was as a collegiate player, one of the best collegiate players in the country, I believe, out of the University of Alabama. So Riley's going to gain a lot of steam, and I think a lot of folks will end up going there. But, in this range, really, I think you're going to see a number of guys, like I mentioned, Hadwin and List. List is the one guy that I think is mispriced probably in here. List could have been in the 9Ks based on how well he's placing. Obviously, in my statistical model, he ranks number 1 in the stats. He hasn't had the best course history here. And obviously, he's missed 2 cuts prior to the match play. Match play is not figured into any of this because we don't have any strokes gain metrics coming from CC Austin. But, Luke List has played very, very well on the odds board and on the DFS salary scale. He's coming in much lower than I think people expected, which is what's giving him so much steam on the ownership side of it. So I think List and Hadwin are probably the 2 chalk bombs that you need to avoid, along with obviously Pat and Kazire. But if you're looking for some pivot plays here, I like Ryan Moore because of the course history. Charlie Hoffman, we've talked about guys taking chances at every one of those tiers, whether it's Day or DeChambeau. Charlie Hoffman is a take a chance guy. Johnny Vegas is the guy who is playing probably the best of this group in terms of just his overall form, statistically how he rates out, and nobody's really talking about him. Streelman's another guy that's got great course history. He's in very good form. So I think if you're looking for guys where you're going to have to deal with a little bit of chalk ownership, Streelman and Vegas are the 2 guys where I would probably end up going. And then, of course, I think I would take a chance on either Mito or Hoffman, depending on where ownership ends up coming in for them. But, if you're going to take a chance, you could end up getting a lot of ownership break in terms of a game theory perspective by going with Bryson and Hoffman. Both guys coming in sub 10%, both guys who are multiple time winners on tour. Obviously, both guys are struggling with injuries this year, and we don't really know where they're coming into this tournament in terms of their health. But the fact that they're playing and gearing up, I think is a good sign, and I will take the chance with both of those guys coming into this tournament. As we drop down into the 7Ks, we've got a mix of different guys, whether it's Euro players or guys who've been playing well as of late, as well as a few guys who are what I would call course horses, and Martin Laird and Lucas Glover. Matt Kuchar is another guy who hasn't missed a cut at this event, and I don't think you're going to see a lot of ownership on him because, he just hasn't been playing that good as of late. But, when you're talking about where ownership is going to pool in the $7,000 range, most of the folks are going to end up on Laird, and I think Tigala. Tigala is a popular name, and folks have been watching how he's been playing. And obviously, when we talk about like the profile of player that sets up well here. Tigala is long off the tee, and he is a very good ball striker. And we're getting back to a putting service. Again, we're still on Bermuda, but it is overseeded with POA, where you're going to have some familiarity with those California guys who typically play the bumpier POA greens. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of steam on Tigala this week. Laird, obviously, playing phenomenally, and he has a very good track record here. Glover is the other guy. I think Glover is the outlier at 7,400. Where we're not seeing a lot of ownership. He's coming in at basically 8-10%, and I think he is a very strong play here. The other guys that I like a lot in this range, I love Bobby Mack, especially if you can get him at a discount. I just think he is a premium player, and you're getting a massive discount. KH Lee, a guy who's won 2 times in Texas and plays TPC courses very, very well. So I love KH Lee at 7,600. When we drop below the $7,500 threshold, there are a few guys that I like down here. I love Matthew Neesmith. He is probably the guy below $7,500 that is gaining the most ownership and most steam. Our boy Anirban Lahiri, I couldn't go without mentioning the Indian superhero for my boy Rick, but Lahiri, fresh off of a very good performance at the Players. I like Anirban. He does hit the ball well off the tee. He has been playing better from an approach perspective. And then the other guy that I'll throw at you is $7,200 is Brian Stroud. I love Stroud. His form is phenomenal. His course history is pretty good. In terms of the stats, the things that I believe line up well, he doesn't rank as highly in my model, but I really do like Stroud this week, and I think he's got a great shot to contend. I don't think he's going to win this event, but again, if you're looking to round out lineups and you're searching for guys down in the $7,000 mark, I think there's much worse places that you can go than a guy like Stroud, who has been playing much better as of late. In the $6,000 range, as we go dumpster diving below 7K, what I've done this week is I've kind of set up the lineups a little bit different. We don't have all the guys listed here, but what I've done is said which guys rank the best in my overall model, which guys rank the best statistically, and which guys have the best course history. You can see that Sebenson overall has been playing the best, which is why, honestly, he's garnering some of the most ownership below $7,000. Smotherman, statistically, is just a beast. Every time you run a model, his name is going to pop up. And the other point of emphasis is just like Davis Riley, who won at TPC San Antonio a few years ago. Smotherman and Barjan, who's in the $6,000 range as well, both finished T2 or T3, I believe, at this event the same year. So a lot of folks are going to be on Smotherman this week. Even though Barjan played well and he was an early favorite, I don't see a lot of ownership. So you could get a massive discount for basically the same, the same narrative in Barjan versus Smotherman. But for me, if I'm going down here, I'm probably going to eat the chalk with Smotherman. I do like J.J. Spawn and Hudson Swafford. Swafford's basically a discount version of Patton Kazire, and from week to week, depending on which tournament you're playing and which part of the country you're in, you can basically swap Hudson and Kazire out. They're basically the same guy. Smotherman comes in as well on the overall model in terms of where he ranks with Spawn. So both of those guys that I mentioned, I like a lot. Chappell's a guy who's won here before. He's got good course history. He played well here a week ago in Corrales. And then Matt Wallace and Brandon Grace at the top of the tournament history chart. Wallace has only played here once, but he finished third. He comes in statistically playing well for those key stats that I threw out there. Brendan Grace has played here 3 times. I think he's got 3 top 30 finishes. Snedeker's another guy who historically plays this course very, very well. And then down the board, if you're looking to get some guys into your lineups to fill it out, I already mentioned Barjan at 6,100. Justin Lower. Justin Lower is going to have 0 ownership this week. He's playing very, very well statistically. He's a name that a lot of folks don't know. I am a huge David Lipsky fan. If you've been watching this show, you know that I have a David Lipsky problem. He ends up in my lineups nearly every single week, but I think Lipsky is also a nice fit for this course. And when you talk about value, right, the type of player that you're getting, we've mentioned it multiple times, and I should say I've mentioned it multiple times. He's a winner on the European Tour, and you're getting him at sub $6,000, and he's been playing fairly well. From a course history perspective, Jimmy Walker's another guy that I like a lot, along with Camilo Villegas. Both guys, $6,200. You could do a lot worse rounding out your lineups. Walker, obviously a major winner. Graham McDowell is another one who has played well historically at this course. So those are the guys for the $6,000 that I would jump on. If you're looking for other names or things, T Dunks is a guy a year or two ago who was catching a lot of steam, and obviously he's been bouncing around back and forth between the Korn Ferry and the PGA Tour. But T Dunks is another guy when you talk about off the tee game and approach game and ball striking that he can catch fire. And if he has one of those weeks where he putts very, very well, similar to Brad Hagee, you could see him contending in a tournament. So those are the guys I like, below $7,000. If at all possible, I would avoid it. And I think if you take the strategy like me where you're not going to be investing heavily at the $10,000 range, and if you look historically the week before a major, like who's won the type of events that happen, you go back to 2018, guys that have won the week before a major. Connors won at Valero before the Masters. Cage Lee won at the Byron Nelson the week before the PGA. Rory won at the Canadian Open before the U.S. Open, and then Fratelli won before the British Open at the John Deere Classic. But other guys, Sink, Ortiz, KH Lee again, Higo, Glover, Wierenski. These are all names that are not big names, and all of these guys have won the week before a major. So don't be afraid to, fade the top of the board a little bit, because typically these guys are trying to work on items or things to gear up for whatever that major is. Obviously, we've got the Masters next week, and they're not necessarily out there to contend. They're there to work on their game. If they find themselves in contention, obviously you've got high-end talent, and these guys will end up winning the tournament because they are the better players. But what I would say is, going into this event, the mindset for those guys is to work on things. It's not to contend, where you have a bunch of other guys who are trying to play their way into these majors. And so there's a lot more incentive for those guys to show up and win. And obviously this is the last chance to get into the Masters. From a betting perspective this week, I've got a number of bets, and that is not my card, but that's okay. What we'll do is I'll rattle off what I'm doing from a betting perspective. Again, we're flying solo, we're live. I don't have a safety net here, so, it is what it is. But for me, from a betting perspective, I've got Hadwin at 35. I've got Luke List at 60. I've got Mito Pereira at 45. I've also got Abraham Answer at 22. Bryson DeChambeau at 33. I jumped on that earlier. I feel very good about that number. If we get Bryson at the top of his game, I love that number. It's just a number that I couldn't pass up. I didn't get the 80 on Kirk, but I did get him at 45. And then, of course, my boy Gary Woodland. If he's playing, I'm betting him. 35-1 Gary Woodland, and I'm toying with Tony Finau at 45, 50-1. Obviously, he played good in spurts at the match play, and so I like where he's going, but I just don't see enough in his game yet where I can pull the trigger. We'll see. If that number gets above 50, I think I could end up jumping on Tony Finau this week just because of the long-term form. And like I said, the things that you're going to need to contend and win at this tournament are things that he has historically done very, very well. So Finau could make his way onto my card. I will tweet it out. So follow me at DFSJags. If you're watching the show, please remember, subscribe, like content, share the link. It helps a ton. And I promise next week we'll have Rick back. You won't have to listen to me talk for 30 straight minutes. And Rick will fill the gap and give you much better information than I can. We've got a major, the Masters. It is Augusta. It is inarguably the granddaddy of them all. Again, you could say the Open because it's gone longer, but it is the one that everybody wants to win. And it's just such a unique format and a beautiful course. And just a wonderful time of year. It kicks everything in motion, and Rick and I will be back next week to cover it all. So again, thanks for tuning in tonight. An abbreviated version, one of us, so only 30 minutes, but that's okay. We'll be back next week to share more. Good luck this week at the Valero Texas Open. Again, like, subscribe, and follow the Nickel City Mafia channel. Hit me up on Twitter at DFSJags, and I'd be happy to chat with you, share my model, and do all of those wonderful things. Rick, enjoy your vacation, and we'll be back next week to talk about the Masters.